Welcome to the Night Audio Stories channel. And today, I'm bringing you my new original story.
Welcome to the Night Audio Stories channel. This is a horror story called Below. The first rule of urban exploration was simple, and everyone said it. Take nothing, leave nothing, tell no one where you went. The second rule was more practical. Never go alone. The third rule, which nobody wrote down but everyone who had spent enough time underground understood implicitly, was this: pay attention to what the dark feels like, because the dark in an empty storm drain felt different from the dark in a room that was occupied, and learning that difference early was the thing that kept you on the right side of a news story. Marcus Webb had been going underground for 6 years. He was 29, an electrician by trade, which meant he understood the particular respect owed to systems, the patience required to trace a circuit you hadn't designed, to work within the logic of something built by someone else, to understand that the structure had its own integrity independent of your presence in it. He brought this orientation to every tunnel he entered, every flooded culvert, every access shaft that opened into something old and unexpected beneath the ordinary cities of the American Midwest. He had started, like most of them started, with storm drains, outflows on the edge of Columbus, Ohio, where he'd grown up and stayed longer than he'd planned. The kind of city that held people not through glamour, but through the accumulation of the ordinary, the job and the apartment, and the familiarity of streets. The storm drains in Columbus were unremarkable in the way that storm drain systems in mid-sized American cities were unremarkable, functional, gray, built in stages over 80 years, expanded to accommodate growth and modified to accommodate floods, carrying the rain that the city couldn't absorb into the rivers that the city had spent a century trying to forget existed. He'd entered them with a headlamp and a friend named Josh, who had since moved to Denver, and a camera he was still paying off, and he had found, underground, the thing he hadn't found above it, the sense that he was somewhere real. Not somewhere dramatic, not somewhere dangerous at first, somewhere that was completely itself, that had no interest in being understood or appreciated, that existed for a function and performed that function whether anyone was present to observe it or not. He found this bracing in a way he hadn't anticipated, coming from a surface life that felt increasingly performed, the job, the apartment, the dates that went nowhere, the vague sense that the person he presented to the world was a draft rather than a finished version. Underground, there was no performance. The concrete was concrete, the water was water, the dark was dark, and what you brought into it was exactly what you had, no more and no less, because the tunnel did not care about your curated version. He'd been going underground for 6 years when he got the message about Cincinnati. The message came from a woman who called herself Lena, which was not her real name. Nobody in the community used their real name online, which was partly security and partly the same instinct that made explorers name the spaces they found, the act of naming a kind of possession, and who had been exploring the tunnel systems under Cincinnati for 3 years. She ran a blog that Marcus had been reading since he started, detailed and careful and photographically excellent, the work of someone who understood that documenting a space was its own form of respect. She posted coordinates and access routes only to the private forum, not the public blog, and she vetted people who asked to join. She messaged him in October. "You ever been to Cincinnati?" He had not. "There's something under the old Pendleton district I've been trying to map for a year. The upper system is documented, standard 1890s brick, nothing remarkable. but there's a level below it that I can't find references for. No construction records, no engineering surveys, nothing in the city archive. I've been in 3 times. The second time I brought GPS. The signal died at about 40 feet down. He wrote back, "How far does it go?" That's the question. I've mapped 300 feet of corridor. It keeps going. The construction is pre-Civil War. I think some of it might be pre-city. I need a second person who knows what they're looking at. He drove to Cincinnati on a Friday in November. He told no one where he was going. He understood this was against the rules he'd made for himself, but Lena had been clear that she didn't want a crowd, and he respected that, and he drove the 2 hours from Columbus in the dark with his gear in the back seat and the radio on, and the specific quiet excitement of someone heading towards something they didn't fully understand yet. He had no way of knowing on that drive that 6 months later the Cincinnati Police Department would find his car in the parking structure on Elm Street, unlocked, with his wallet and phone inside and his keys on the front seat, and Marcus Webb would not be found anywhere that Marcus Webb was supposed to be found.
Lena met him in the parking structure at 9 on a Friday night. She was 32, small, dark-haired, with the efficient physical economy of someone who spent a lot of time in confined spaces. Nothing wasted, nothing casual, the body disciplined into precision. She checked his gear without asking, and approved of it without saying so, which was its own kind of communication. GPS will cut out at 40 feet, she said. I use a different system. She showed him a spool of bright orange paracord, heavy duty, 300 feet of it on a reel. I mark every 100 feet with a colored band, orange, red, white. If we hit white and can't see an end point, we turn back. You've gone to red before? Once, on the 3rd trip. She looked at the spool. I didn't go to white. Why not? She considered the question. The sound changed, she said. At 200 feet, the acoustics changed. It's hard to describe. Sounds started coming back wrong, not echo, wrong, like the space was responding to sounds it shouldn't have been able to hear. She paused. I want a second set of ears this time. The access point was a utility plate in the basement of a parking structure that was half empty on a Friday night, the kind of structure that once served a neighborhood that was once thriving and which was currently in the particular administrative limbo of a city trying to figure out what it was going to become. Lena had a key. She never explained where the key had come from, and Marcus didn't ask. In the community, the provenance of access was something you trusted or didn't, and the plate came up easily, recently hinged, recently oiled. Below it, a ladder, iron, old, descending into brick-lined shaft that smelled of mineral water and old stone, and something else that Marcus registered and filed away. Not decay, not sewage, not the organic smell of an active drain. Drier than that, older, the smell of a space that had been sealed for a long time and which retained in the quality of its air some chemistry of that sealing. They went down. The upper system was exactly as Lena had described, standard 1890s municipal construction, brick laid in a modified English bond pattern, arched ceilings, the occasional iron drainage grate above them showing the grid of a street they were below. Marcus recognized the construction type. He'd been in similar systems in Pittsburgh and Cleveland, the infrastructure backbone of Rust Belt cities built in their confident decades when they were certain they would continue to grow forever and built accordingly. They moved through it for 20 minutes before Lena stopped at a section of wall that looked identical to the surrounding wall, except for the mortar. Here, she said. She put her hand on the bricks. The mortar between them was newer, not recent, but newer than the surrounding courses. Someone had bricked up an opening and done it well enough to pass casual inspection, but not well enough to fool someone who was looking for it. Behind them, darkness, and behind the darkness, the sound of a space larger than what they were in. Marcus shone his light through. A corridor, wider than the storm system, arched ceiling, higher, 8 feet, maybe 10, and the construction was different, not brick, stone, cut stone, dressed and fitted with a precision that belonged to an earlier century, the joints so tight that Marcus could see no mortar at all. He put his hand on the stone. It was cold in the specific way of stone that hadn't been touched by sunlight for a long time. "What built this?" he said. "That's what I've been trying to figure out," Lena said. They entered at 11, and for the first 100 feet, Marcus documented and catalogued with the focused attention of someone whose professional training was in the tracing of systems. He photographed the joints, measured the ceiling height, noted the slight but consistent downward grade of the floor. They were going deeper as they went forward, perhaps 1 degree, perhaps less, but consistently. The corridor wanted to go down. The paracord played out behind them, orange in the beam of their lights, connecting them to the ladder and the parking structure and the city above. Marcus found the cord's presence more comforting than he would have admitted to anyone who wasn't underground with him. It was a simple thing, a child's thing in some ways, a thread connecting you to where you'd come from. But the logic of the simple thing was sound. The thread existed. The thread didn't lie. If everything else became uncertain, the thread remained. At the red band, 200 feet, Lena slowed. "Here," she said quietly. "Listen." Marcus stopped and listened. His own breathing, the far-off whisper of water somewhere in the upper system above them, the sound of 2 people standing still in a stone corridor 40 feet below Cincinnati, and something else. It took him a moment to isolate it because it was low, below comfortable hearing, in the register that you felt in the chest before you heard it properly, and because it was not consistent. It pulsed, not regularly, not like machinery, but with an irregular rhythmic quality that was just familiar enough to trigger pattern recognition without being regular enough to satisfy it. His brain kept trying to fit it into something. Engine, water main, HVAC system. It didn't fit any of them. "You hear it," Lena said, not a question. "Low frequency, pulsing. It's been there every time. It gets more present the further down you go." "More present," said Marcus, "not louder." "That's right," she looked at him. "Not louder, more present. Like the difference between a sound that's far away and a sound that's close but very quiet." Marcus thought about this. And at 300 feet, the acoustics changed. Not just the sound, the quality of the space. She was looking ahead, into the dark that their lights hadn't reached. It's hard to explain. The corridor doesn't feel different. Same stone, same ceiling height, but the way the space responds to you changes, like the difference between an empty house and one that's occupied. Marcus kept his light on the corridor ahead of them. It went straight, perfectly straight, in a way that the upper system hadn't. The upper system curved and branched with the logic of municipal engineering, following streets and property lines. This corridor went straight without regard for what was above it, straight in a direction that, by his reckoning, had stopped following any street grid 20 feet back and was heading toward. He thought about the city map he'd studied, the river, the Ohio River, 200 feet above their heads and a half-mile south. "You want to go to White?" he said. Lena was quiet. "First time I came down alone,
I came to red, and I turned back. The second time I came with a friend from the forum. We came to red, and she wanted to turn back, and I agreed, and we turned back. She paused. Third time I came alone again, and I went past red, and at 250 the acoustics changed, and I went to 260, and I stopped. What stopped you? There was a door, she said. Marcus looked at her. A door set into the stone, iron, old, pre-Civil War old, hinges hand-forged. It was closed. She paused. It had a handle. I put my hand on the handle, and she stopped. I had the physical sensation of something on the other side of the handle, not the door moving, not a sound, a sensation, through the iron. She looked at the dark ahead of them. I let go, and I walked back to the red band, and I came here. I posted on the forum for someone I trusted. And here we are, Marcus said. And here we are, Lena said. So, white? Marcus looked at the cord behind them, red band, bright and specific in his light. 300 feet of cord, Lena said. White at 300. At 250 feet, the acoustics changed. Marcus noticed it in the same moment Lena touched his arm. They registered it simultaneously, which he would think about later. The fact that the change was clear enough to be noticed at the same time by two different people, which meant it was real and not psychological. The corridor was identical to what it had been at 200 feet. Same stone, same ceiling, same slight downward grade, but the space was different in the way that Lena had described and which Marcus now understood. Not different in its physical properties, but different in what it did with presence. They were no longer in an empty space. They were in a space that was aware of being occupied. He kept moving. Both of them kept moving, because stopping felt like a concession to something that hadn't yet asked for one. At 260, the door was there. Iron, as Lena had described, set flush into the stone of the left-hand wall, which was the first break in the wall they'd encountered since entering this level. It fit its frame with the exactness of fine craft, no visible gap, no corrosion gap, no seam of light. The handle was iron, lever style, surface corroded but solid. Below it, at waist height, a plate of darker metal that Marcus didn't immediately identify. Not iron, bronze maybe, cast, not forged. Engraved with something that his light was wrong for reading. He'd need the camera's flash. He set up the shot. The flash fired. In the fraction of the second of the flash, in the corner of the frame, Marcus saw something he hadn't seen with his headlamp. Against the wall opposite the door, at the far edge of the flash's reach, there was a shape, low against the stone, hunched, the shape of a person sitting with their back against the stone, legs drawn up, head down. He took the camera from his eye. He shone his headlamp at the far wall. Nothing. Stone. Empty corridor. "You see that?" he said. "In the flash," she said. She was already looking at the far wall, her own light on it. "Yes." "Shape?" "Yes." They stood for a long moment. The low pulse was stronger here, not louder, still not louder, but present in a way that wasn't acoustic anymore. It was physical. Marcus could feel it in his molars, in the backs of his eyes, in the specific bones of his inner ear that translated pressure into meaning. "Pareidolia," he said. "The flash creates shadows." "That wasn't pareidolia," she said. She said it quietly and without argument in her voice, a flat statement of observation, like a reading from an instrument. Marcus looked at the photograph on the camera's LCD. He zoomed. The shape at the far edge of the frame was partially in the flash and partially in darkness, and what was in the flash was... He turned the camera off. "The door," he said. He put his hand on the handle. The handle was cold, colder than the surrounding stone, colder than anything at this depth had reason to be. Not cold like metal in an underground space, cold like something generating cold. He felt it travel up through his hand and into his wrist and his forearm, and he kept his hand on it. No sensation from the other side. He waited for it. He looked at Lena, who was watching him with an expression that was controlled and careful. Nothing. He pressed the lever down. The door opened.
What was beyond the door was not a room and not a corridor. It was a space. Marcus stood in the door frame and shone his light into it, and the light went far. Not infinitely. He could see the far wall eventually, or something that might have been the far wall, but farther than any underground space in this part of the country had any logical reason to extend. The ceiling was higher, the stone different, darker, rougher, the precision of the fitted blocks giving way to something more raw, as if this part had been cut rather than built. Cut from the native rock, the limestone of the Ohio River Valley, by means he couldn't immediately identify. No chisel marks, the surfaces too smooth for hand tools, too irregular for anything modern. The floor descended steeply here, not the 1-degree grade of the corridor, but something more decisive. The floor went down and away from them into the space, and at the bottom of the visible slope there was water, a pool or a channel. At this distance he couldn't tell. The surface of the water was still, and reflected his light back with the flat mirror quality of deep water that hadn't been disturbed in a long time. The pulse was inside his chest now, not metaphorically. He could feel it in his sternum, feel it sinking with something, and this was the thing he didn't say to Lena and didn't write in the notes he was keeping, because he had no framework for it and no language in which it didn't sound like someone who had been underground too long and was starting to make things up. "The water," Lena said. She was beside him, their lights running parallel into the dark. "It wasn't there the last time." Marcus looked at her. "You've been through this door." "I've been to the door. I didn't open it." A pause. "I've been to the room before, from a different access." She said it with the specific guilt of someone revealing a thing they had decided to reveal and then doubted the decision. "There's another way in, from the storm system 3 blocks east. There's a drain that drops into a channel, and the channel connects to this space from the south end. I've come in that way twice." She was quiet. The water wasn't there either time. "The water wasn't there," said Marcus, "and now it is." "Now it is," said Lena. "How long between your last visit and now?" 6 weeks. Marcus shone his light at the water's surface. Still, completely still. At this depth, in a sealed underground space, water should behave, he thought through it, like any still water. Groundwater, maybe, seepage from the river table. The Ohio ran 200 feet above them and half a mile south, but the water table extended further than the river's physical bed, and cast limestone like this was porous, channeled. Water found its way, but the surface was wrong. Still water in an underground space moved slightly with the minute vibrations of the city above. Traffic, machinery, the constant low-frequency movement of a populated urban environment. This water was not moving at all. It was still in a way that required stillness.
as if whatever was generating the pulse he felt in his sternum was cancelling the surface's natural vibration. "I don't like the water," he said. "I know," she said again, and she started down. He followed because this was the thing he would not be able to explain to anyone later, not to his mother when she cried at the police station, or to Sandra who called from Denver, not to the detective who interviewed Lena twice and found her answers perfectly consistent and perfectly insufficient. Because there was a logic to this place that had been accumulated for 250 feet, and that resolved at this moment into a direction, and the direction was down, and he followed it the way he had always followed the logic of systems, not blindly, not without awareness, but with the trust that a system this old and this deliberate had a coherence that, if understood, would be navigable. He understood, in the same moment that his foot touched the water's edge, that this was not a correct understanding.
The water was warm. Not warm like heated water, warm like living water, the specific temperature of biological heat, the heat of something metabolizing. He pulled his boot back from the edge and crouched and put his bare hand in. 93 degrees, maybe, 94. He had no thermometer, but he had his own body temperature as a reference, and the water was close to it. Close enough that the distinction between where his hand ended and where the water began became, after a few seconds of immersion, difficult to maintain. He pulled his hand out. The water on his hand dried in the cold air of the space and left a residue. Not dirt. He was familiar with the mineral residue of underground water, the grey or rust-coloured scale that iron-heavy water left on skin and equipment. This was different, pale, almost iridescent in his headlamp. He rubbed his fingers together. It had a texture, a slight resistance, like... he didn't have a word for it, like something biological. Like something that had been alive in the water was now on his hand. He stood up. The far end of the space, 50 feet away, 70, it was hard to tell, was occluded. Not by darkness. The far end of the space was submerged. The water didn't stop at the pool he'd approached. It extended, and its surface met the rock ceiling at some point that his light couldn't reach clearly. And beyond that meeting point, everything was underwater. The space continued beyond the point where the ceiling touched the water. There was a larger system below, flooded or partially flooded or deliberately filled with warm water. "Lena," he said. She was at the water's edge, 5 feet from him, looking at the far wall. Not the far submerged end, the near wall to his right, the eastern wall, if his orientation was still reliable, which it might not have been. "There are marks," she said. He came to her. On the wall, at about chest height, cut into the limestone with the same impossible smoothness as the room itself, were marks. Not writing in any alphabet he recognized, not pictograph in any tradition he could place. Regular, precise, arranged in horizontal bands that ran the length of the visible wall. 3 bands, 4 feet of vertical space, perhaps 100 marks in total. Some repeated, some appeared only once. The regularity suggested language, the unfamiliarity suggested something much older than any language spoken by anyone still alive, or possibly anything that had ever spoken in the way that humans spoke. "Someone made these," Marcus said. "Yes," Lena said. "Something made these," he corrected himself. He put his light on the marks more carefully. The middle band ran at eye level, his eye level, which was 6 feet, which meant whoever cut these marks had been working at roughly human height,
which was either evidence of human origin or evidence of something that worked at the same scale as humans, which was not the same thing. He photographed them. His flash fired, and the marks stood out in the bright moment of the flash with a clarity that the headlamp couldn't give, sharp-edged, precise, cut into the limestone with a tool that left no visible kerf, no scoring around the edges, only the mark itself, as if the material had been displaced without being chipped, as if the limestone had been moved rather than cut. He thought about this, about what it implied about the tool, about the tool's age, if the room's age was pre-Civil War, which was what Lena believed, which was what the construction suggested. He thought about who needed to write something down here, in the warm dark below Cincinnati, in a stone room that no city record acknowledged, in an alphabet that no living linguist would recognize. He thought about what they needed to say.
Lena didn't answer. She was photographing the marks methodically, working from left to right, her flash firing in a regular pulse. Marcus moved along the wall in the other direction, toward the submerged far end, following the marks to where the lowest band disappeared below the water's surface. The water's edge was warm. He could feel the warmth on his ankles from a foot away, radiating up through the air. He stood at the edge and shone his light down into the water, following the lowest band of marks, down into the flooded distance where the light attenuated and the marks became shadows and then became invisible. The marks continued below the water. The water was not the end of them. Whatever had been inscribed here, the water's rising had not interrupted it. The marks went down. In the light of Lena's flash, Marcus saw the shape. Not the shape from the corridor, a different configuration, larger, horizontal, below the surface, just below the surface, visible through the still warm water, the way shapes were visible through glass that was almost clear, but not quite, present in the way of something that had not attempted to hide itself and did not need to, lying at the edge of the drop-off in the warm water at a depth that Marcus estimated at 8 or 10 feet, which put its upper surface 4 feet below the water's surface, which meant it was very large to be visible at all. It was looking at them. He could not have explained how he knew this. It had no face that his light resolved, no eyes that his light caught. It was a shape below the water's surface, indistinct at the edges, large in a way that was hard to quantify in the dark, but it was looking at them. The directedness of it was unmistakable, the same directedness that animals communicated with their bodies before they moved, the orientation, the attention, the specific quality of stillness that was not rest but readiness, the stillness of something that had been still for a very long time and had learned to wait with the whole of itself. And it had been still since before they'd entered the room, Marcus understood. It had been down there in the warm water below the marks it had made or that had been made for it, oriented toward the door, waiting for the door to open. And when the door had opened, it had continued to be still, because stillness was not the same as inaction. Stillness was a choice. Stillness was the decision to let the other thing come to you. It had let them come in. It had waited while they looked at the marks. It had waited while Lena photographed and Marcus documented. And it had been patient in the way of something for which patience was not an effort, but a condition, the baseline state, the thing it returned to between the moments when patience was no longer the right response. Marcus had the sudden and complete understanding that it had not yet decided patience was no longer the right response. He reached for Lena's arm. She was already reaching for his. "Back to the door," he said. "Yes," she said. They didn't run. This was the thing Marcus would remember with something that was not quite pride, but was adjacent to it. They did not run.
They moved quickly, up the slope, retracing their steps to the iron door, and they moved with the controlled urgency of people who understood that running in an underground space over uncertain ground is how you became an injury on top of a problem. They moved as fast as they could move safely, and Marcus counted his steps because he could not look at his cord while he was moving, and he needed a number to hold on to. He counted 62 steps to the door. He had counted 40 when they'd come in.
The corridor was different on the way back. This was not imagination, and he knew it was not imagination because Lena said it first at the red band, looking at the cord with her light and then looking at the walls. "The stone," she said. "Yeah," Marcus said. The stone was wet, not from seepage. No water was running on the surface. Wet in the way that the palm of a hand was wet, a thin film of moisture that covered the walls uniformly, that had not been there when they'd come in. He put his hand on the wall and looked at his hand, and the residue on his palm was the same pale, faintly iridescent material he'd brought up from the warm water at the edge of the pool. He wiped his hand on his jacket. He looked at the residue on his jacket. He looked at the walls. "Don't touch the walls," he said. Natalie said. She was already moving, already ahead of him, the cord reel in her hands and the cord reeling in as she moved, and Marcus moved with her, stayed with her, and he did not look back, and he did not look at the walls. He looked at the cord, orange, red, orange again. The cord was his. It was his cord. It connected to the ladder and the parking structure and Elm Street and Cincinnati and the surface world of November and parking structures and the unremarkable streets of the Pendleton district. He reached the orange band, and he did not count the feet. He reached the bricked opening, and he went through first, not from cowardice, he told himself, but because he was larger, and once through he could help Lena through, and he was in the upper system, the 1890s brick and the municipal logic, and they stood on the other side and helped Lena through, and they stood in the upper system in the smell of concrete and old drain and the distant sound of the city's water moving above them. Lena looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "The shape," he said, "at the water." "Yes," she said. "What was it?" She was quiet for a long time, long enough that Marcus heard from somewhere in the system above them, from a drain grate or a junction or some acoustic trick of the brick, what sounded like the pulse, faint, attenuated by distance and material, but there, familiar, the same irregular rhythm he'd felt in his sternum at 260, now audible from above, transmitted through the city's own infrastructure. "I don't know," she said finally, "but I think it's been there for a long time, and I think—" She paused. "I think the water's rising." Marcus thought about the pool, about the submerged far end of the space, about the warm water and its biological residue and the marks on the wall in an alphabet that had no name in any book he'd ever read. "Why does the water rising matter?" he said, "if it's been down there for a long time?" "Because it wasn't flooded before," she said. "Those marks, I've photographed them on 3 separate visits. On the first visit they were dry. On the second, the lower band was damp. Tonight, the lower band was below the waterline." She met his eyes. "It's rising at roughly 8 inches per visit. I've been coming every 6 to 8 weeks for a year." She did the arithmetic with her expression, watched it land. "At that rate." "When?" Marcus said. "Spring," she said. "Maybe summer." He thought about the space, the ceiling at 40 feet, the flooded far end, the shape in the warm water, looking at them. Something was filling that space from below, Something was raising the water level from beneath 8 inches every 6 weeks toward the ceiling, toward the level of the city above. "What are you going to do?" he asked. Lena was already repacking her reel, systematic, methodical, the cord feeding neatly onto the spool. "I'm going to come back," she said. "Lena." "I'm going to come back," she said again. "Someone needs to document this. Someone needs to understand what's down there before—" She stopped. "Before the water reaches the brick level, before it reaches the upper system." "Before it reaches the city," Marcus said. She met his eyes. Neither of them said what came after that. He drove back to Columbus on Saturday morning, and he sat in his apartment, and he looked at the photographs on his camera, and he looked at them for a long time. The marks on the wall, he could see them clearly in Lena's flash photographs, regular, precise, 3 horizontal bands. He uploaded them and ran image searches, sent the best shots to 2 friends in the archaeology community he'd met through the forum. Neither responded with anything useful. One said the marks resembled no writing system in any database he had access to. The other said he couldn't help with this, and please not contact him about it again, which was the kind of response that told you something about the question, even if it didn't answer it. The shape in the water he had not photographed. He could not have explained why. In the moment when the flash lit the warm pool and the shape was there at the edge of the drop-off, his hands had been at his sides. He had not reached for the camera. The camera was in his hand. He had been holding it, and he had not raised it. He would think about this for a long time, not with regret exactly, with the awareness that some part of him had made a decision that the rest of him hadn't been consulted on. He messaged Lena. She responded quickly, which was unlike her. "I'm going back next weekend. I need to see the 3rd band before the water covers it." He typed, "I'll come." She sent back, "You don't have to." He typed, "I know." He drove back to Columbus the following Friday. He parked in the same parking structure, the same level, the same spot. He left his phone in the car. He left his wallet. He took his keys, because you needed keys to get back out of the structure, and he put his keys in the breast pocket of his jacket, where they would not fall. He went to the access plate. He unlocked it. He went down. The upper system was empty and silent, the municipal infrastructure going about its business around him, indifferent. He moved through it at a pace that was faster than he'd moved on the first visit, the route already memorized, the body knowing before the mind the shapes that mattered, the junction, the side drain, the modified English bond. He found the bricked opening. He removed the bricks. He looked through. The corridor was wet. The walls were uniformly covered in the same pale residue, not a film now, a layer, thick enough to have texture. He put his light on it, and the light scattered in a way that should not have happened in stone, in the way that light scattered when it hit a surface with its own luminescence, faint, barely perceptible. The walls of the corridor were faintly luminescent. He stood at the bricked opening for a long time. He thought about Lena. She had been here since. She was precise about her schedule. She'd said Saturday morning, 6 a.m. She wanted to be in and out before the weekend foot traffic started above. It was 11 p.m. Friday. She should be here. She should have been here and gone. He called her name into the corridor. His voice sounded wrong in the corridor, absorbed by the wet, luminescent walls in a way that voices were not supposed to be absorbed. No answer. He stepped through the opening. He moved down the corridor with the cord playing behind him, the orange band, the red band, the familiar count. He moved past 250. He moved to the door, which was open. Lena had come through, or something had come through. The door was open and stood against the far wall of the corridor, and the space beyond it was... He stood in the doorframe. The space was flooded. Not the far end, not the pool, the entire space up to the level of the doorframe, filled with warm water. The water was at his feet, at the threshold, exactly at the iron door's sill. The floor of the room, the slope he'd walked down, the marks on the wall, all of it submerged. The water was still and warm and faintly luminescent in the way the walls of the corridor were luminescent, and it filled the space from wall to wall and from the floor to approximately 12 feet of depth, and the marks on the eastern wall were invisible below the surface, and the far end of the room where the ceiling had met the water was now entirely, unambiguously flooded, and the water in the room was continuous with whatever was below. On the surface of the water, floating near the doorframe, was Lena's cord reel, bright orange. The cord trailed from it into the room, into the water, going down. He looked at the water's surface. The water's surface was still. Below it, at depth, in the warm, luminescent water, something moved. He could see it, not clearly. At the depth at which a shape was visible, the luminescence gave just enough light to establish that a shape existed. It moved slowly, horizontally, from one end of the drowned space to the other. It was large. It moved with the specific deliberateness of something that was not searching, but patrolling, that knew precisely where it was, and was moving in a pattern rather than toward a destination. Then it stopped. It, he understood, noticed the door, noticed the opening, noticed him standing in the doorframe with his light and his cord and his jacket with the keys in the breast pocket. He oriented. Marcus did not move. He looked at the surface of the water, at Lena's cord reel, at the cord descending into the warm, still, luminescent water. He looked at the thing below the surface that was looking back at him. He reached out very slowly, and he took Lena's cord reel from the water's surface. And then he turned around, and he began to walk back up the corridor. And he walked at exactly the pace he had walked on the way in, because running would not help, and the cord was in his hands, and the cord was true. And somewhere along that corridor he passed from the state of understanding what he was doing to the state of simply doing it, moving, breathing, not looking back, the orange cord, and then the exit, and then the brick, and then the shaft, and then the ladder, and then the city, the surface, the night air of Cincinnati in November, cold and absolute, and full of the ordinary sounds of a city going about its ordinary existence above the space where the water was rising. He sat in the parking structure for a long time. He looked at the cord reel in his hands, Lena's cord, orange, 300 feet on the reel, the kind that marked in colored bands, orange, red, white. The cord was fully wound, every foot of it back on the reel. She had not gone in with it. Or something had wound it back. He drove home. He drove home to Columbus, and he sat at his kitchen table until morning, and then he called the police. And when the police came, he told them about the tunnel, and the access plate, and the utility permit that didn't exist, and the bricked opening, and the flooded chamber. He did not tell them about the shape below the water. He did not know how to tell them about the shape below the water. They found the access plate. They found the upper system. They found the bricked opening,
They found the corridor, wet-walled and luminescent, and they found the iron door, which was closed when they got there, closed and locked, and which their bolt-cutters handled after 40 minutes of work. Beyond it, stone. The corridor extended precisely 40 feet and ended in a stone wall. No door in the wall, no chamber, no water, no marks on the eastern face. The ceiling height was 6 feet, and the construction was brick, 1890s bond, consistent with the upper system. One of the officers, however, a young woman named Carla Reyes, who had been on the force for 2 years and who would transfer to a desk assignment 6 months later, citing no specific incident, simply a change in professional direction. She noted something in her supplemental report that the detective's primary report did not include. She noted that the floor of the 40-foot corridor was wet, not from seepage. The brick was dry above the first 6 inches. Only the floor was wet, from the sealed stone wall at the far end all the way back to the iron door, as if water had recently occupied the space and drained or been withdrawn, leaving the floor wet in the manner of a surface recently vacated by a body of water. She also noted in the supplemental that the far end of the 40-foot corridor, the stone wall, was warm. Not dramatically warm. She had put her palm against it to confirm, the way you put your palm against a wall to check for fire behind it. The stone was warm, body temperature, she wrote, or close. She did not speculate on the cause. The detective who interviewed Marcus noted that his description of the interior was inconsistent with the physical space. He noted this in the report with the particular professional blankness of someone who had learned to document what was documented and leave the rest to inference. He noted that the female companion Marcus described could not be located at her known addresses, and her online presence, the blog, the forum account, had been deleted between Friday evening and Monday morning. He noted that the cord reel found in Marcus Webb's possession on the night of the call was 300 feet of orange paracord, fully wound, dry, with no wear patterns consistent with underground use. He noted all of this and filed the report, and the case remained open. Marcus Webb moved back to Columbus. He went back to work. He went underground once more in the spring, in a storm-drained system he'd known for 4 years. Familiar ground, nothing remarkable, and he came out an hour later and sat in his car and did not go underground again after that. He told no one why. There was nothing to tell that anyone would find useful. He thought about Lena sometimes, about the question she'd asked him in their vetting call 3 years before. Why do you go in? He thought about the cord reel, fully wound, dry, 300 feet of orange paracord with no wear patterns consistent with use. Someone had wound that cord. Whatever had wound it had been patient enough to do it right, band after band, fed neatly onto the spool, the way an experienced explorer would do it, the way someone who respected the equipment would do it, wound it and set it on the water's surface where he would find it, left it for him to find, the same way you might leave a note or a sign or an indication that you had received a message and wanted the sender to know. He didn't know what the indication meant. He suspected that understanding what it meant would require going back down, and he was not going back down. He had made that decision standing in the corridor with the cord in his hands, and he had not revisited it, and he did not intend to. 6 weeks after Marcus Webb's report to the Cincinnati Police Department, a city infrastructure crew conducting routine inspection of the storm system beneath the Pendleton district reported elevated water temperature in the lower junction at the point identified in the police report. The temperature reading was 93 degrees. The crew's supervisor filed a maintenance request with the Cincinnati Metropolitan Sewer District, citing a probable heat exchange malfunction in an adjacent structure. The maintenance request remained pending. 3 months after that, a post appeared on the private forum under a username that had never been active before. No profile, no access history. The username was a string of characters that, when run through an automated translation service by a forum member who later deleted his own account, returned a result that no one who saw it discussed publicly afterward. The post contained one sentence: "The upper level is accessible now." The post was deleted within the hour by an administrator who could not explain when asked how the account had been created without going through the standard vetting process, or how it had achieved posting privileges, or what the sentence meant. The water, as best anyone could determine, continued to rise.
Thank you for listening till the end. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to hear more interesting stories.